What would happen if the owner of a famous restaurant chain went undercover as a regular customer and discovered an employee insulting a guest right in front of him? Elias Warren sat motionless in the driver's seat of the old truck he had rented, his eyes fixed on the financial report open in his hands. The streaks of red scattered across the columns of numbers looked like small cracks, but ones deep enough to shatter the reputation he had spent 15 years building. Maple and Oak, the once celebrated buffet chain praised by customers for its sincerity and quality service, was now showing troubling signs at Branch 13. Employee turnover was rising rapidly, revenue was slipping slightly but consistently, and worse than anything, the rare feedback from loyal customers carried the tone Elias despised most: disappointment. The 48-year-old man exhaled slowly, setting the papers on the seat beside him. Beneath the torn jacket and the old baseball cap pulled low over his face, no one would recognize the owner of a multi-million-dollar restaurant chain. But Elias didn't care about appearances. He cared about one thing: what was rotting inside Maple and Oak and why it had been allowed to grow unchecked for so long. He leaned slightly, staring through the windshield at the building across the lot, its neon sign flickering weakly. Each time the light sputtered and died, Elias felt as if he could hear the weary breathing of a system that had once run smoothly but was now breaking down. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes glinting with a cold, steel-like determination, the look of a man who would forgive nothing and no one who dared to tarnish his name. If this really is the place that stripped Maple and Oak of its soul, I'll take it back myself, no matter the cost, Elias muttered, his voice low and firm, more a vow than a thought. The tension in his chest mixed with anger, but it wasn't blind rage. It was the steady patience of a wolf watching its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been a cook, a dishwasher, a floor cleaner in the early days of his career, and he knew exactly how to spot when a branch was rotting from the inside. It wasn't because the food got worse or the prices went up, it was because people forgot why they started doing this job in the first place. Elias leaned back against the seat, pulling the cap lower, the weight in his chest slowly replaced by absolute focus. This afternoon, he would walk into that building not as the owner, but as an anonymous customer. And if his instincts were right, a few people inside that branch wouldn't have a place at Maple and Oak by tomorrow. Late in the afternoon, Elias Warren stepped through the glass doors of Maple and Oak, his figure blending into the line of customers waiting by the buffet counter. His faded gray hoodie and worn-out shoes made him look like just another worker coming off a long shift. The yellow glow from dusty old light fixtures reflected off the flickering neon sign outside, casting a weary, heavy air over the place. Elias moved slowly to the tray counter, keeping the indifferent look of a casual guest, but every sense in his body was on high alert, taking in every detail. Then, a sharp voice cut through the hum of the dining hall. "Didn't you hear me? This isn't a charity. Move aside!" A tall man in a wrinkled Maple and Oak uniform barked at an older customer standing frozen by the salad bar. It was Chad Rooker, a name Elias had seen on the staff list, but today he witnessed firsthand the misplaced authority in that voice. The man being yelled at, likely in his 50s, had a gaunt face and wore an oversized coat. He stood motionless, his sunken eyes filled with confusion and shame. He said nothing, just lowered his head, his trembling hand clutching the hem of his coat. The clinking of utensils against trays stopped abruptly. A few customers glanced over but quickly looked away, avoiding involvement. "Go find somewhere else to beg for food. Here, you pay like everyone else," Chad said louder, his words drawing smirks from a few nearby employees, none of whom spoke up. Elias gripped the tray in his hands so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw set firm, but he stayed silent, his sharp eyes locked on Chad's every move like a blade poised to strike. Then, a softer voice broke through the tension, hesitant but steady. "I'll handle it." Elias looked up to see a young woman with neatly tied curly hair, her dark eyes carrying something different, not fear, but disappointment. Tasha Green, according to her name tag, let out a quiet sigh as she grabbed a clean plate from under the counter. Without another word, she scooped some salad and a few pieces of grilled chicken, walking over to the older man, She placed the plate gently in his hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Go ahead and eat, sir. It's just dinner." The man looked up, disbelief shining in his tired eyes, his lips trembling. "Thank you." His voice was hoarse, shaking. A loud clang echoed through the room as Chad slammed a serving spoon onto the hot bar, his face flushed red with anger. "What are you doing, Tasha? Planning to turn this place into a soup kitchen? Why not let every homeless bum eat for free?" Tasha didn't turn around, her voice calm but clear enough for him to hear. "He's a person too." Her words weren't loud, but they landed like a slap against Chad's cold indifference. Elias stayed still, not moving an inch, but inside him a storm was raging. Under the brim of his lowered cap, the corner of his mouth curled into a cold, knowing smile. He's just buried himself, Elias thought. A few more hours, and Chad Rooker wouldn't be standing behind that buffet counter for another day. Elias Warren sat at a small table in the far corner of the dining area, a spot where he could see both the buffet line and the checkout counter. Beneath the low brim of his baseball cap, his eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail. The food trays were smeared with grease and hadn't been wiped clean. The salad bar was nearly empty, yet no one hurried to refill it, and most telling of all was how the staff interacted with the customers. It was clear no one here truly cared anymore. Elias lifted the cheap plastic cup to his lips, pretending to sip water, but he was carefully listening to every conversation around him. Chad Rooker stood lazily by the hot bar, scrolling through his phone while customers waited. Every so often he would glance up, tossing irritated looks at anyone who lingered too long in front of the food. Tasha Green, however, was different. She moved quickly, her eyes constantly scanning the room to help elderly guests or those unsure of what to choose. Elias noticed her quietly straightening a crooked tray, adding more salad to the bar's simple tasks that other staff ignored. When Elias stepped over to refill his drink, he caught a scene that grabbed his full attention. Chad approached Tasha, his voice lowered but loud enough for Elias to hear. "Tasha, don't think I haven't noticed. If you dare give food to those freeloaders again, I swear I'll report you straight to Marla. You don't want to lose your job, do you?" His tone hissed through clenched teeth, heavy with threat. Tasha froze for just a moment, her hands pausing midair with the tray. Then she tightened her grip on the cleaning cloth and answered simply, "I don't think doing the right thing should be a reason to get fired." Elias stayed silent, but he could feel the muscles in his arm tighten. Tasha's reply wasn't loud, but it was firm, and in that moment Elias saw a glimpse of the kind of people who had worked beside him years ago, people who took pride in serving, not just earning a paycheck. He stepped closer to the drink station, filling his cup, then leaned slightly toward Tasha, his tone casual, like that of a curious customer. "Do you always help customers like that?" Tasha hesitated briefly, her eyes flicking toward Chad before she looked back, giving a tired but genuine smile. "I just do what I think is right." Elias gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold, knowing smile. That answer told him everything he needed to know. Tasha Green deserved to be protected, and as for people like Chad Rooker, they had just signed their own sentence. That night, Elias Warren sat alone in the old truck parked in the empty lot across from Maple and Oaks Branch 13. The dull yellow streetlights cast a tired glow over the flickering neon sign, each sputter of light and sudden blackout sounding almost like a desperate sigh. Leaning back in his seat, his hands clasped together, Elias stared through the fogged windshield, feeling as if he were looking straight into the soul of a body slowly rotting away. In his entire career, Elias had learned one undeniable truth. No company ever collapses because of bad food, only when the people inside it forget why they exist. And tonight, he knew that was exactly what was happening here. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen, his voice low and commanding, like a general giving orders before a battle. "Have Marla Jenkins in the meeting room at 7 a.m. sharp, and tell her, if she's even a minute late, she can consider tomorrow her last day here." On the other end, his internal secretary replied promptly, "Understood, sir." Elias ended the call. his gaze still locked on the silent building in the distance. A cold breeze swept through the lot, making the neon sign crackle with a harsh buzzing sound, like the labored breath of something on the verge of collapse, only sharpening his resolve. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, not to rest, but to remember. Back when Maple and Oak was just a small restaurant, he had wiped every grease stain off the floors himself, checked every food tray, and, most importantly, he had known exactly what was on every employee's mind. Now, after seeing Chad humiliate a customer and realizing Marla, who should have been supervising everything, had vanished from the dining floor, Elias knew he had placed far too much trust in people who didn't deserve it. His eyes hardened, cold and sharp, like a blade ready to cut away the rot. Leaning forward, he murmured into the quiet night, "Tomorrow, everything changes. They either learn to stand tall again, or they walk out of here for good." A lone owl perched on a nearby power line let out a raspy hoot, adding to the tension in the air, as if warning of an approaching storm. Elias started the engine, the truck rolling slowly across the cold concrete. He was not a man who enjoyed making threats, but his presence always signaled something inevitable, a purge. Tomorrow morning, he would walk through those doors no longer as a faceless customer. Tomorrow morning, Maple and Oak would stand before the very man who built it, and there would be no place left for anyone who wore the uniform without earning the right to do so. The next morning, the sky was covered in a pale gray layer of clouds, and a damp chill hung over the parking lot of Branch 13. Elias Warren arrived earlier than scheduled, standing outside for a long moment, observing the employees starting their shifts. They walked past him without noticing, no one paying attention to the man in a thick coat and baseball cap leaning against the wall. His eyes were sharp and cold, no longer carrying the concealed look of the night before. When the clock struck exactly 7, he finally stepped through the staff entrance, hands in his pockets, his gaze sweeping over every corner of the kitchen and the serving line. Marla Jenkins was already in the staff break room when Elias entered. She held a clipboard in her hands, but her eyes betrayed clear unease as soon as she saw him. She nearly dropped her cup of hot coffee, her face paling. Elias pulled out a chair and sat down, his movements slow but carrying a weight that filled the room. Placing both hands on the table, his voice was steady but sharp enough to cut through any awkward greeting. "Marla Jenkins, do you know why I had to be here this morning?" Marla swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Warren. I was told that..." Elias interrupted, not needing to hear more. "Then let me tell you. Last night, I sat in this dining room for hours. I watched one of your employees humiliate a customer right in front of everyone, and I didn't see you anywhere. Is this how you manage this place?" Marla straightened slightly, attempting to defend herself. "Sir, I always monitor things closely. It's just that last night I had to finish some reports in the office, and Chad..." Elias leaned forward, his gaze drilling into her. "Chad? You're trying to justify him? A man who disrespects customers, threatens his co-workers, and you just let him do as he pleases? You don't need to explain because I saw it with my own eyes." The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Marla struggled to steady her breathing, her face a mix of fear and shame. Elias's tone remained calm, never raising his voice, yet every word landed like a hammer. "As of today, Chad Rooker no longer has a place at Maple and Oak. I'm not asking you to consider it, I'm telling you to make it happen right now." Marla's mouth opened as if to protest, but one look from Elias silenced her. After a long moment, she only managed to nod, her voice trembling. I understand, sir." Elias leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlaced, his eyes never leaving hers. "And you need to understand something else. Either you walk out of this office and truly manage this place, or this will be your last day sitting in that position." In the tense silence, Marla lowered her head, gripping the clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Elias stood, his final words ringing out before he left the room. "Prepare for a full staff meeting. I want everyone to understand that starting today, Maple and Oak will no longer be the same." The smell of grease and steam from the kitchen still lingered in the air as Elias Warren stepped into the dining area where the entire staff had been gathered before opening hours. Plastic chairs had been pulled into a long row along the aisle. Some employees leaned against the buffet counter, their eyes filled with tension. Marla Jenkins stood by the checkout, clutching her clipboard tightly, her face still marked by the unease from their earlier meeting. Chad Rooker arrived a few minutes late, walking in with a careless swagger, his wrinkled uniform shirt and phone in hand. He even let out a long yawn when he saw Elias, squinting at him with a defiant look, still believing this man was just another senior manager on a routine inspection. Elias walked slowly to the center of the room, removing the baseball cap that had hidden his face since the night before. Murmurs instantly rippled through the room, a few younger staff members lifting their heads in shock, mouths slightly open. A waiter whispered under his breath, unable to hide his surprise, "Oh my God, it's Mr. Warren." At the back, Tasha Green's eyes widened, her face briefly showing surprise before shifting into an expression of quiet hope. Elias swept his cold gaze across the room, his voice steady but powerful enough to silence every whisper. "I am Elias Warren, the founder of Maple and Oak. And last night, I was here as an anonymous customer. I saw everything. Not reports, not excuses, but with my own eyes." He paused, letting his words fall heavy into the thick silence. Chad froze for a moment, his phone slipping from his hand onto the table with a small clatter. He tried to keep his voice calm. "Sir, if I had known you were there, things would have been different." Elias turned sharply toward him, his tone so cold the room seemed to drop a degree. "Exactly. That's the problem. You only know how to act decent when someone's watching, but you humiliate customers when you think no one notices. And at Maple and Oak, that is unacceptable." Elias took a step closer to Chad, his words not loud, but carrying the weight of a verdict. "You humiliated a man simply because he was poor, and when a coworker stood up to help, you threatened her. Chad Rooker, you no longer work here. Right now, you can leave this building." The room was silent. Chad's face turned red, his mouth opening as if to argue, but he looked around and saw no one stepping in to defend him. Marla stood frozen, holding her clipboard so tightly her knuckles were white. Tasha lowered her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the floor, not out of fear but to hide the emotion she was holding back. Elias looked around the room, his voice softening but losing none of its edge. "Maple and Oak was built to serve everyone, not to judge who deserves a meal. And starting today, anyone who doesn't understand that will not remain here." No one responded, only silent faces lowered, as if each person was now questioning themselves. Elias gave a slight nod, his eyes briefly meeting Tasha's, where he saw what Maple and Oak truly needed, not people who knew how to give orders, but people who knew how to care. After Chad left the dining area, his steps heavy with defeat, the tension in the room began to ease, but silence still hung over everyone. Elias Warren stood still for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over the bowed heads of the staff. He took a deep breath, his eyes settling on the far end of the room, where Tasha Green stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron, her eyes filled with worry and uncertainty. Elias walked slowly toward her, each step echoing on the floor, adding weight to the seriousness of the moment. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was steady and calm, no longer carrying the sharp edge it had held when addressing Chad. "Tasha Green, last night I saw you do what everyone here should have done. You didn't hesitate, you didn't need anyone's permission, you simply did the right thing. And it's people like you who keep Maple and Oak true to what it's meant to be." Tasha looked up, her brown eyes wide with surprise. She seemed unable to believe what she was hearing, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Elias gave a firm nod and continued, "Starting today, you will be promoted to shift lead. I want you to guide others the way you did last night, quietly, patiently, but with courage. And beginning next week, you will join the assistant manager training program." Murmurs immediately rippled through the room. Some staff members looked up, their faces showing surprise, but no one objected. They had all witnessed what Tasha had done, and more importantly, they felt the sincerity in Elias's words. Tasha remained still, her cheeks flushed, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I'm not sure I deserve this. Elias leaned in slightly, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. You've already proven you do, and Maple and Oak needs people like you now more than ever. At that moment, a single clap echoed from the corner of the room, a young blonde employee. Then another joined in, and soon the entire room was filled with applause. Tasha lifted her head, her eyes glistening with emotion, her lips curving into a small smile, the first genuine smile she had shown in months of working under pressure and exhaustion. Elias straightened, the coldness in his eyes from earlier replaced by a rare expression of trust. Looking around the room, he raised his voice to address everyone. This is not a reward. This is responsibility. And I want every single person here to look at Tasha and understand that Maple and Oak only survives when we respect our customers and respect each other. The applause rose again, louder and more determined, as if signaling that something had truly shifted in the room. Tasha bowed her head slightly, whispering a quiet thank you to Elias. A thank you, he acknowledged, with nothing more than a firm, reassuring nod. That afternoon, Maple and Oak felt like a beast, slowly awakening after a long sleep. Elias Warren didn't leave the dining area as he usually did when inspecting other branches. Instead, he chose a small table near the window, a spot where he could see the buffet line, the checkout counter, and part of the open kitchen behind. He sat there, untouched food in front of him, sipping a bland cup of coffee, observing every detail like a patient judge waiting for the right moment. Marla Jenkins passed by, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest, trying to appear busier than usual. Elias glanced at her, and just one cold look was enough to make her falter before quickly hurrying toward the kitchen. The other employees seemed to be pulled tight by an invisible string, their usual sluggish movements replaced by quick, nervous efficiency. But Elias wasn't looking for people to simply rush. He wanted to see who truly understood their work. About an hour later, as he was jotting down notes on a small piece of paper, a scene made him immediately rise to his feet. Luis Ortega, a young kitchen worker in an oil-stained uniform, limped behind the hot bar. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he struggled to balance a heavy tray with one hand, while the other pressed lightly against the counter, clearly fighting through pain. Elias strode straight toward the kitchen, ignoring the surprised stares of the staff. "Luis?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm enough to stop everyone nearby. Luis flinched, lowering his head. "Mr. Warren, I'm fine, just a little knee pain." Elias stared at him, unwavering. "How long have you been injured?" Luis swallowed. "Last week. I slipped while carrying a tray, but we're short-staffed and I didn't want Tasha to have to cover my shift." That answer told Elias everything. The problem wasn't just understaffing. Without hesitation, he grabbed an apron from a nearby hook, tying it around his waist, his voice decisive. "Luis, you're done for today. Sit down and ice that knee. I'll take over the line." The kitchen fell silent for a few seconds, then soft murmurs began to ripple through. Marla appeared at the doorway, her mouth opening as if to argue, but Elias's piercing look silenced her instantly. He turned his gaze on her, his tone sharp as a blade. "And I expect a full staffing report by tomorrow. If we're short-staffed, that's your responsibility, not Luis's or any other employees." Elias picked up a ladle and began stirring the hot trays with swift, practiced motions, so precise that a few younger cooks nearby whispered in awe. He worked quickly and confidently, just like someone who had spent his youth in a kitchen because he had. But more importantly, he was proving something. No one at Maple and Oak, not even its founder, had the right to stand aside while his employees pushed themselves beyond their limits. Tasha, standing near the salad bar, watched him for a long moment, her eyes shining with quiet pride. And in that moment, she understood what he was doing wasn't just about control. It was a reminder to everyone of the true values this place was built on. That afternoon, Maple and Oak no longer felt like a stuffy room filled with the smell of grease and indifference. Under Elias Warren's watchful gaze, the rhythm of the work seemed to have changed completely. Footsteps no longer dragged with exhaustion. Orders were no longer called out lazily or with irritation. No one needed Elias to give orders, but everyone moved with a new sense of purpose, as if his very presence was a silent reminder of what this place was supposed to be. Tasha Green was the most noticeable change. She no longer stayed quietly behind the salad bar, simply doing her own job well. Now she was guiding two younger staff members on how to properly arrange the vegetable trays, gently correcting a server struggling with the payment machine, and even walking over to a table, apologizing with a warm smile for a delayed dish, and personally bringing extra water to the guests. She didn't act like she was in charge, but every small gesture made others instinctively follow her lead. Elias observed it all, and he knew he hadn't misjudged her. In the kitchen, Luis Ortega, who Elias had insisted take a break, now sat at a small table in the corner, wrapping a bandage around his knee. He looked slightly embarrassed when Elias passed by, but Elias simply placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice low but reassuring. "You've done well. Don't worry. This isn't something you should carry alone." Luis looked up, his expression easing, and nodded. Elias returned to the dining area, standing near the checkout counter with his arms folded. A middle-aged woman, who at first glance seemed rather difficult, stood hesitantly at the hot bar, unsure of what to choose. Seeing this, Elias stepped forward, giving a slight nod and speaking with a polite but firm smile. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. I'll make sure today's meal is one you'll enjoy." Without hesitation, he adjusted the misaligned tray of roasted chicken and served her a fresh portion. The woman looked surprised for a moment, then smiled and nodded in approval. That scene caught the attention of many employees, and without a single word being spoken, they began to stand a little straighter, move a little faster, and speak to customers with a newfound respect. From a corner of the room, the first sound of laughter broke out, a large family passing around slices of toasted bread, chatting cheerfully. Then more laughter followed, spreading throughout the dining room like a ripple of energy. Elias stood still, arms crossed, watching as Tasha patiently guided a new employee with remarkable care. He said nothing, but a familiar feeling rose in his chest. This was the rhythm he had built for Maple and Oak in its early days, a place where employees didn't work just for a paycheck, but because they took pride in giving customers a proper, dignified meal. Elias exhaled slowly, his gaze briefly passing over Marla Jenkins, who now stood by the counter, for the first time that day holding a cloth to wipe down the tables. Her movements were still awkward, but at least she had started. And that was exactly what Elias wanted to see in Awakening, beginning with the smallest of actions. As the lights in Maple and Oak shifted to a warm golden hue, signaling the end of the shift, Elias Warren stood silently by the window, arms crossed, quietly observing. There were no employees sneaking glances at their phones, no weary sighs, no eyes avoiding customers anymore. Instead, everyone was working with focus and purpose. Tasha Green, her apron still damp with a few streaks of water, was helping a younger staff member wipe down the salad station, her calm gaze carrying a quiet authority. Luis Ortega, assigned to lighter duties at the cold prep area, carefully checked each tray of food, occasionally glancing toward Elias as if to reassure him that he wouldn't disappoint. Even Marla Jenkins was bent over, inspecting napkins and trays, her movements awkward but far more serious than ever before. Elias walked slowly toward the checkout counter where Tasha had just finished guiding a new employee. He stopped, his voice calm but strong enough to reach everyone in the room. "You all did well today. Not because I'm here, but because you've begun to remember why you're here." Conversation stopped, a few heads lifted to look at him. Elias continued, his expression firm but no longer as cold as it had been that morning. "Maple and Oak doesn't exist because of roasted meat trays or salads. We exist because every customer who walks through these doors feels respected, no matter who they are or how much money they have. That must be the standard, not the exception. And from today forward, anyone who doesn't understand that will no longer have a place here." Tasha swallowed, her hands clasped in front of her, but her eyes shone with pride. Luis looked up and gave a small nod. Marla, for the first time that day, met Elias's gaze and answered with determination. "I understand, sir. There won't be any more mistakes." Elias gave a slight nod, saying nothing more. He moved toward the door, stopping one last time, his voice lowering but still clear enough for all to hear. "I can leave now, but don't make me come back here as an angry customer again. Maple and Oak belongs to all of us. Either we keep it standing with our own hands, or we lose it to indifference." The door swung open, and a cool evening breeze swept in, carrying a refreshing chill. Elias stepped outside, glancing up at the neon sign above the entrance. It had been repaired, glowing steadily now, free of its harsh buzzing. He paused for a moment, looking through the glass. Inside, Tasha was instructing the new employee on cleaning, Luis was carefully checking food trays, and the rest of the staff worked with a focus rarely seen before. A faint smile crossed Elias's face, not a smile of satisfaction, but the smile of someone who had finally seen a spark of hope. Pulling his cap lower, Elias walked away, his figure blending into the crowd on the street. He didn't need to come back right away because today, Maple and Oak had begun to stand on its own again. A restaurant may thrive on good food, but it can only endure through the way it treats people. The true power of a brand doesn't lie in polished reports, but in every employee who knows how to bow their head and thank a customer. If you believe that respect is the only thing that keeps a customer's trust, hit like and subscribe to help us share more inspiring stories like this. And don't forget to leave a comment with the 3 words "respect comes first," because that is where every service should begin.